Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Politics. Well, before we get started, I want to hit on a couple of things. First off, this program and all the programs that we do are produced by Prayer Box Ministry. And you can check us out at prayerboxministry.org. Now, that website was designed to be an interactive website. You can do all kinds of things over there. You can join a prayer club, have somebody read the Bible to you, you can watch videos. Our programs are being streamed over there. Lots to do. Go over there and check us out, prayerboxministry.org. Also, we did not get to do a program last week because we had technical difficulties. Okay. By technical difficulties, I mean Microsoft came in and took over my computer for the better half of the afternoon. And by the time they were done, it was too late to do anything. So I put last week's program off till this week and made some modifications so that it's current. But as I wrote on the intro, my intention this year. Okay, let me back up. So last year I was going to do a program at the end of the year for the Right Wing Reverend that talked about the accomplishments that Trump had done, and I was not keeping track, by the way. I just decided I was going to do that at the end of one year, and I sat down and started making a list of the things that he had done. And when I got all done, I looked at the list and I thought, there's no way I can cover this in a half hour. That is never going to happen. So I broke it down to domestic, financial, and international areas. And by doing that, I had to do a 3-part series. It took me an hour and a half to cover just the first year of his accomplishments with him in office. And I want to preface this program and add an addendum to last year's program that all of these accomplishments that I talked about then and I'm going to talk about today were all done with a democratically controlled House, an obstinate House. Actually, the House is Republican, but the Democrats are doing absolutely nothing. The Senate is Republican, but it's only by 2 votes, and Mitch McConnell will not change those rules, which is just infuriating me. We could have gotten every bit of Trump's agenda done if Mitch McConnell would change that stupid self-imposed rule of needing 61 votes to get anything done. The Constitution says 51, and if he would follow the Constitution, we could be a lot further along than we are. But Trump has managed to do all of this with those impediments in his way, and a 90% negative press coverage nationwide, day in and day out, a constant hammering from the press and from a special prosecutor in Mueller who is unbelievable. I'm sure there will be books written about how corrupt and evil this investigation is. But every time it's been at him for over a year and a half, and it is a constant barrage of lies, innuendo, misinformation, miscalculations, and petty stuff coming. Uh, uh, Even with all of that constant barrage, he manages to get the things that we talked about last year on the Right Wing Reverend, which, by the way, we talked about our website. Go over there and check us out. That 3-part program is over there, um, and it's amazing. He's done more in the first 500 days of his presidency than most presidents in my lifetime have done in their 4 or 8 years as being president, and that includes Reagan. So today what I want to do is, again, I've broken them down by international, domestic, and financial. And anyway, like I was saying at the beginning, my intention was to do another program or even a 3-part program at the end of the year, depending on how much he had gotten done, uh, talking about the accomplishments of Trump. And the reason is still because it's not that I'm pro-Trump, but the problem is, in my opinion, that nobody is going to give Trump the proper dues. You know, the press is definitely not going to uh, talk about the accomplishments of the Trump administration. And that to me is worse than lying. If all you do is give the negative press and you don't talk about anything that he accomplishes, aren't you doing more harm to the country than you're doing to him? It amazes me that the left is willing to sacrifice what's good and best and right for America just to get Trump. So with this backdrop, we're now going to talk about, and I want to lead off with the international accomplishments of the Trump administration. Now, this does not include what was done in the first year. This is just since January of this year up until today. Number one, ISIS is destroyed. Easy statement, right? When you consider that Obama was in power for 8 years and ISIS on a regular basis was videotaping the beheading and killing of Christians and Americans, that they were terrorizing, that they took over the better part of 3 countries in the Middle East, and they were robbing and destroying antiquities and buildings and murdering people just for the sake of it and stealing oil and smuggling drugs and doing what crime cartels do, and Obama did nothing. Trump has come in less than a year and a half, has absolutely destroyed and eliminated ISIS. Now, does that mean there are not small cells? Of course it doesn't. There's always going to be uh, malcontents, but they don't control any country. They don't control any land. They're not stealing oil. They're not destroying antiquities, and they're not beheading Christians or Americans. ISIS is destroyed. Number two, he has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And this one, and I want you to remember this, the Nobel Peace Committee is a bunch of left-leaning liberals. For them to even accept the nomination of a right-wing conservative is a miracle. And why was he nominated? Because he managed to do what no president has done since the 1950s, and that is sit down and talk about peace with the leader of North Korea. And in this instance, it's Kim Jong-un. They had their conference. Kim Jong-un, whether you believe him or not, has agreed in writing to denuclearize North Korea. He has already destroyed the silo where they were firing their nuclears from, and he had the press from the West in there to witness the destruction of this. And they are on their way to setting up a timetable of things that they are going to do and how they're going to do it and how they're going to verify. Now, here's the thing that I like about this negotiation. Trump has given nothing except the promise to not engage in war games off of the coast of North Korea. That's what he's agreed to not do. But he said, as long as they are negotiating and keeping to what they say, we will stop that. North Korea has already destroyed their silo. They have released an American prisoner that 3 American prisoners that they had. And again, we've given up nothing. Even if it falls apart right now, we win. We come out ahead in these negotiations. The next step that I believe will happen is they will sign, North Korea, South Korea, and America will sign, in my opinion, again, a declaration to the end of the Korean War. Uh, Legally, technically, and politically, the Korea War has never ended. And by the way, Trump has told everybody, including North Korea, that removing troops from the demilitarized zone at the 38th parallel is non-negotiable. We will not be removing them. Good for Trump. Every president since, I believe it's H.W. Bush, it could have gone back further, but that's the only one. That's as far back as I remember. The American embassy in Israel, every president has promised to move it to Jerusalem. Donald Trump accomplished that on 5/14 of this year. The official movement of the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Why is that important? Because by recognizing that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, that puts the rest of the Middle East on notice that that land is non-negotiable. We as Americans will defend that city should they enter, because, as you know, every embassy, the soil that that embassy embraces is our sovereign territory. So if invaders come in, which is much more likely in Jerusalem than it was where it was before, we will defend it. And everybody in the Middle East is now on notice, and that is a huge accomplishment. Again, the only president since '87 that has promised it, and he's the only one that's kept that promise. Also, tariffs were announced on Canada and Mexico. Now, tariffs were announced on steel and aluminum coming into this country, but I want to single out Canada and Mexico now because I think the way that Trump has done this has been a masterstroke. He started last year by saying and pulling out of the NAFTA agreements, which was an absolute boondoggle to us and a gift from God to Canada and Mexico. So naturally, they are not going to want to renegotiate, and Trump knew that. So they've been negotiating for the last year. We've come to no agreements, and we're probably never going to, because their goal is going to be to stall. So what did Trump do? He imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum coming in from Canada and Mexico. Why is this a good thing? Because when those products cross the country, across the border, we will collect money from them. So what Trump is saying is, one way or the other, we're going to get a fair deal here. We're either going to do it the right way through renegotiating NAFTA, or we will pull out of NAFTA and we will get more money out of you from the tariffs. And you could pick which way. So he's using the hammer approach. Now, Mexico and Canada have been yelling and screaming about how unfair this is and how uh, lopsided it is, and how much Trump is lying to the American people about how unfair it is. So I did some research, and I have three sources here that I got this information from: the U.S. Office of U.S. Trade Representatives, the International Trade Commission, and the Canadian Minister. We got these numbers even from the Canadian Minister of International Trade. Now, what I'm going to explain to you is the tariffs that are charged on American products going into Canada, and the tariff that we charge on products coming from Canada. And I'm going to compare these, okay? automobiles. When we send an automobile to Canada, they add 25% onto that before they sell it to the Canadian people. If the Canadians send cars to us, we put a 2.5% tariff. If we ship steel to Canada, they charge a 25% tariff on any steel going in there. What do we charge on their steel coming into here? 0. Aluminum. If we ship any aluminum into Canada, they charge us a 45% tariff. Now, if they ship aluminum to us, what do we charge them? 0. What about copper? If we ship copper to Canada, they charge us 48% tariff. Tariff is another word for tax, okay? They charge us 48% tax. Now, if they ship copper into our country, what do we charge them? 0. What about something silly like a vacuum cleaner? If we ship vacuums into Canada, they tax us 35%. If they ship vacuums into the United States, what do we charge them? 3.5%. Cable boxes. If we ship cable boxes to them, they charge us 35%. If they ship them to us, what do we charge them? 3.5%. What about televisions? If we ship televisions to Canada, they charge us 45% tax. If they ship TVs to us, what do we charge them? 5%. And the one that Donald Trump has used and is just unbelievable. If we ship any dairy products to Canada, and that means eggs, milk, cheese, if we ship any of that to Canada, they tax us, are you ready for this? 270%. If they ship any to us, what do we charge them? 0. So do you really think it's unfair? Donald Trump is not trying to change all of the tariffs, all of those items that we're getting screwed on. He wants to change aluminum and steel. Let's just take a look at those two again. Steel, if we ship steel to Canada, they charge us a 25% tax. If they ship it here right now, we charge them nothing. Donald Trump is saying, hey, if you're going to charge us 25% to sell it in Canada, then we're going to charge you 25% to bring it into this country. That's fair. What about aluminum? If we ship aluminum to Canada, they charge us a 45% tax. We currently charge them nothing if they ship it into our country, and Trump isn't trying to charge them 45%. He wants to charge them 25%. They will still have a 20% advantage over us, and they're whining and crying. When you look at all of the items that they charge us absorbent tax on that we charge them little or nothing, and Trump is picking 2 of them and not trying to gouge them like they're gouging us on dairy product, but just making the playing field even on steel and not even even on aluminum, but at least closer. And you would think, listening to the Canadians, that we want their firstborn child. Nothing could be further from the truth. So they're either going to pay 25% on aluminum and steel, or they're going to renegotiate NAFTA. My guess is they're going to take the 25%, because if they renegotiate that whole list, they're going to lose all the way down. So if I were Canada, I would just shut up and take the 25% on aluminum and steel and move on. Now, those tariffs were announced, I believe it was 6 months ago. but they were just recently imposed. They just took effect this month, I believe. Also, the G7 meeting was held in Canada, and needless to say, everybody in the G7 was upset with the U.S. because of the announced tariffs on aluminum and steel. And Donald Trump took the air right out of the room when he said he wanted Russia back in the G8. Now, why was Russia kicked out of the G8? They were kicked out because they took over part of Crimea. Now, do I agree with Trump that Russia needs to be back in the G8? Initially, my answer was no, but I have reconsidered that. I think they should be, and here's why. They may have done bad and evil things in the Crimea. They shot down a passenger plane and killed 270 people. These things we know to be true. These things are facts, and they do need to be punished. However, it's kind of like trying to punish a child 5 years after he's done something wrong. Obama did nothing to punish Russia. That is over and done. Unless we are willing to go in there and start a war to kick them out, that is a done deal. To pretend like your enemy does not exist and to not sit down and talk and negotiate and hash things out, that is just as silly, in my opinion, as doing nothing when you're trying to be friends with them, which Obama did, by the way. So yes, I believe Russia should be back in the G8. If for no other reason, I mean, if you want to bring them in at a lower level or a junior member, but they do need to be there so they can at least have open communication. The tariffs, as I said, on aluminum and steel were worldwide. They were primarily aimed at China. And the tariffs that he wants to charge China, when he announced them, was 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum. We have, I believe the number is around 300 and some billion dollar trade deficit annually with China. So as soon as Trump announced these, they were not in effect, and China made three concessions immediately. They increased by, I believe, $50 billion of purchase of computer chips. There was some cancer machines that were set to go into China. They allowed those to go in tax-free, and they agreed to stop taking automatic tech from companies by 2022. Now, what that means is this. When a company does business in China, they have to agree to share their technology with the Chinese government, and China has agreed to stop that by 2022. Now, here's the bad part about that. That will be in 4 or 5 years. By that point, China's goal is to dominate the world in certain sections, and technology is one of them. So by announcing it, it sounds like they're doing something, but in their estimation, by 2022, they will already be the dominant market and everybody will be trying to steal from them. What did Trump do? He announced another $50 billion in tariffs on China. They have not gone into effect. The first ones have gone into effect, but the second ones have not. China immediately countered with increasing their taxes, their tariffs on us by $35 billion. The press is trying to make this sound like it's going to be a trade war and that the world will end and prices will go up astronomically. Let me explain a little bit in dollars and cents. With the tariffs that we have put on Chinese goods, on aluminum and steel coming into this country, um, on an entire automobile, on steel and aluminum, the tariffs that we have put on there will raise the cost of an automobile somewhere around $125 per automobile. Basically nothing. That's less than tax, title, and license. So basically nothing. So the press is crying wolf. Um, and if they continue to play that game and they want to keep raising the odds, we will win that, simply because of the volume. They have much more to lose than we do. So the next one is tough talk on North Korea. Again, since the 1950s, no president has been able to sit down and discuss peace or denuclearization of North Korea until Donald Trump comes along. And from the beginning of the Trump administration, the press had been saying that he was talking too tough, and he was all talk. We were going to get into the Third World War. He was going to get a nuclear war. He was going to attack North Korea. And Donald Trump was talking the kind of talk that dictators understand. He called him Little Rocket Man, and he told him that my nuclear button is bigger than your nuclear button, and just playing word games. And guess what? Just like I've said all along, most of my life, these pot-bellied dictators and leaders around the world, they understand one thing, and that is strength. They understand power, they understand strength, and they understand when somebody's playing games with them. Putin ran all over Obama. Everybody in the world ran all over Obama because he invited it. He had the word wuss written on his forehead, and every dictator in the world saw it and took complete advantage, and he let them. Conversely, all the leaders in the world know that Donald Trump is not to be messed with. Putin hasn't done anything, and Putin is not going to do anything because he knows Trump will go after him. That is just not on the table. Kim Jong-un is at the negotiating table, and as I talked about earlier, they have a signed agreement, and they have an agreement in principle. They're working out the details. Trump has conditionally agreed to stop the war games off of the coast. As soon as he stumbles and doesn't do what he's supposed to do, Donald Trump will just send all the military over there and say, "Let's do the games." He's not willing to do it, so let's go do it. He bombed Syria for using chemical gas on their people. And he told them he was going to do it. They called him, and he went in and did it, and he bombed them. Good for him. He campaigned on that. He said he wanted to bomb them back to the prehistoric days. I don't have a problem with that. But instead, what he has done is a controlled, calculated bombing in kind retribution for what he has done. He has broken international laws over there, and Trump went and held him accountable. And the last one I want to talk about on the international part is he got us out of the Iran nuclear deal, and he reimposed sanctions. And here's the interesting part about what he did on those sanctions. I did a program a couple of years ago when Obama put sanctions on Russia, and I laughed. And the title of the program is Sanctions Are for Sissies. Because you can put sanctions on somebody, but that doesn't mean anything. They'll just find another way to do it. Or somebody else that'll take their currency or buy their products or let them use their bank. But here's what Donald Trump has done. Again, a brilliant move. And this one is doable because of technology. Trump is using technology to enforce this, and they're called secondary sanctions. So let's say that I put a sanction on Russia that they cannot sell oil in this country, and Russia says, "Okay, fine, I'll just sell oil to the rest of the world." Well, Trump has said, "Okay, but any country in the world that buys your oil, we're going to block them out of the international banking system as well. And if you try to go around that, anybody that has anything to do with your oil, we will block them out of the international financial markets." Now, why is that so effective? Because that freezes their assets and they cannot buy and sell anywhere in the world. Any bank that touches them automatically is left out of the international market, and that's basically means the bank is out of business. If they can't conduct international business, they're out of business. So what Trump is doing is he's putting these sanctions on not just the government as a whole, but on specific businesses and specific people in the country. They can't get to their money. They can't buy and sell. They have no access to banking. They are basically stuck, broke, and homeless. Those are effective sanctions. And that's one of the reasons that Kim Jong Un came to the table. His country was and is poor to begin with. And when he put sanctions on certain people in that government to where now they're basically broke and homeless, that will get their attention really quick because they can't get it on the black market. There's already been a half a dozen banks in China that were trying to do business with North Korea, and they were shut out of the system, and they're out of business. So these work. These are good sanctions. The secondary sanction is what they're called, and that is a total plus. That makes the sanctions effective and almost immediately. And that is the type of sanctions that he has put on Iran. Another thing about the Iran nuclear deal is this: that was never an agreement. Iran never signed that agreement. It was never passed by the Senate in this country. The only official act that was right with that is that the UN voted on it and passed it. Obama didn't sign it. Biden didn't sign it. The people in Iran didn't sign it. It was just an oral agreement. And when you think about that, they verbally agreed but would not sign an agreement. So when you now, how are you going to enforce that? I mean, okay, so Iran breaks the deal, which they did less than a month after we supposedly had this agreement. They were testing ICBMs. Well, how do you enforce it? There's no contract. They didn't sign anything. It's not a treaty because the Senate didn't pass it. It was an excuse for Obama to get rid of all of the sanctions and give them all the cash he could possibly give them. And he did. And that went to sponsor terrorism. Iran built up their commercial airlines, and they went on a spending spree with all of that money that Obama freed up because they knew that they were going to break that agreement and they wanted to get that done before America took any action. What they didn't count on is Trump doing it quite as fast as he did. Well, that's the international. Now let's take a look at the domestic things that Trump has done in the first 6 months of his second year of his presidency. The first one, he sent the National Guard to protect the border down in Mexico. Now, there was a group coming from South America. These were not Mexicans. These were a group, and I guess they do this every year. There's a group, and they all travel together from South America on foot all the way through Mexico to get to the United States. Trump said it makes it a national emergency, so he sent the National Guard down there. Now, when they got down there, I was hoping that they would use firepower to protect our border. Unfortunately, the laws in our land allow certain things to happen, and attorneys were crossing the border and advising this group from South America what to say to the border guards and how to get around being arrested and sent back. And every one of them did that. They were processed and released into California. Unbelievable. I know this is never going to happen, but in my opinion, Trump should take the National Guard, cross the border, and it, and that is an act of war. That would be invading Mexico. But nobody crosses that border. They don't get a chance to talk to attorneys. They don't get a chance to lie. They don't get a chance for anything. Here's a line in the sand. If you cross it, I'll shoot you. You are not coming into this country. Deal with it. But he did send the National Guard down there, and he sent them a huge message, and he laid the groundwork. Nobody's picked up on this, but I did. He's laid the groundwork for the next time that happens, and he calls it a threat to our national security, which I believe it is. He will have a precedent because nobody fought him on that. So now there's a precedent that that group coming up next year will be a threat to our national security. And at that point, certain things happen. As an example, martial law could be declared down there, and those attorneys and all those people could be kicked out of there. Also, calling it a national security, he could take the money from the Pentagon at that point and build the wall with the $25 billion from that budget instead of relying on the House and the Senate. So the precedent is set. It didn't go the way I wanted, but the precedent is set. The table is set to make that happen. Number two, he continues to have the most dramatic deregulation in the U.S. history. One of the things that Reagan did when he was in office was he made a big deal about deregulating. Now, Trump has done a dramatic, the more than any president in history, and it's quicker than any president in history. I believe he single-handedly brought back the coal industry because Trump, through the EPA and through executive order and through regulation from the EPA, had effectively put the coal industry out of business. And that was Obama's stated goal. He wanted to do that and said he was going to do that because he wanted America to be on green energies. And so his goal was to get the coal industry out of business. And he basically did that. Trump has single-handedly brought that industry back to life. So he continues to do that. He also put in a regulation that for every one new regulation that was written, two had to be gotten rid of, and that will drastically cut back on the amount of new regulation that any department wants to start. That would mean that if the EPA wants to pass one regulation, they got to get rid of two. Also, Donald Trump passed Title X. He campaigned on defunding Planned Parenthood, as many of his predecessors did, as did the House and Senate Republicans, and nobody has ever done that. So what did Trump do? He passed Title X. It did not single out Planned Parenthood. What it did was said any business that engages in abortion is not to be funded by the federal government. That's Planned Parenthood. However, I think Planned Parenthood will get around this by splitting themselves into two companies. They have two sections within the same company. I think the next step they will do is they will split themselves into the abortion side and the women's health side, and the government will continue to fund the women's health side, and just it'll be a paper thing, but at least he's tried, at least he got it done, and at least We are not giving money directly to the abortion industry. And that's more than anybody else and any of his other predecessors had done, or the House and Senate. Another thing Trump has done is he put a hiring freeze on for the federal government. And because of that, and through attrition and retirement, there have been 23,000 government jobs eliminated. That doesn't mean not hired, vacant, empty, waiting to be filled. That means government jobs eliminated. When these people quit or died or retired, those positions were eliminated. They're not hiring. They're moving people around to fill those job functions, but that certain position that a person quit, died, or retired from, that position is eliminated, and those responsibilities are spread to other people. That's great. 23,000 jobs. I mean, you take 23,000 times 100,000, that is $23 million a year he's saving in salary. Go Trump. Another thing he's done, and I don't, it's hard to call this a policy win, but this is definitely a win. He continues winning and handling the Mueller investigation perfectly. For somebody of Trump's temperament and bravado, for him to operate and continually deal with Mueller and not reaching out to slap him, he's handling Mueller. He is just absolutely ignoring him. And as every day goes on, here's how the picture becomes clearer and clearer. Trump winning, Mueller losing. Trump, credibility. Mueller, no credibility. Trump, truth-telling. Mueller, lying. Republicans, together. Democrats, bitter. He continues winning while handling the Mueller investigation beautifully. Watching this thing implode is great. And the upcoming elections is going to be the culmination of a 2-year ongoing implosion from the Democratic Party, and specifically by Mueller. I think right now Mueller is hanging on, hoping for a blue wave. But when the red wave happens, I believe that they will find a graceful way for him to go away and disappear. Because, and I believe the contributing reason that the Democrats are going to get killed in the next election is because of Mueller and the constant lying, the constant fabrication, the constant muckraking that he is doing, and the Democrats are behind him 100%. And all the Democrats are banking on electing House and Senate people who want to impeach Trump. That's not going to happen because the Trump approval ratings are higher now than Obama and Bush were at the same time in their presidency. They're not going to impeach him. No matter how much muck they throw at him, he just keeps winning, and the American people are beginning to see through the crap that the Democrats keep trying to throw at him, and none of it is sticking. He recently signed a bill into law called the Veterans Choice Legislation. This is probably the single best thing. The VA was a mess and still is a mess, and has been for many years. My dad was in the military, as was my son, and the nearest base to us is an hour and a half drive away. And that is a similar story throughout the country. You figure some of these vets, World War II or Vietnam, Vietnam veterans today are in their 60s and 70s. Do we really think they're going to drive an hour and a half away for serious health issues? No. These guys are not being able to be taken care of, and not just because of location, but because of inept and bureaucracy. So what did Trump do? He said, if you are a vet, you can go to any hospital that is near you and they will process it through the VA. The hospital gets paid by the VA, but you can go to any hospital you want. You don't have to go to a VA hospital. And that is probably the single best thing that Trump could have done. When you think about the pressure that's going to take off of the VA, first off, they ought to be able to eliminate some staff nationwide in the VA office if they have less people coming in. Secondly, it ought to help with their backlog and their scheduling problems. If you have less people to schedule, less people to come in, your scheduling ought to be a lot easier, a lot more accurate, and a lot faster. All by doing one thing. And Trump managed to get that done. I think that's awesome. Now let's talk about the financial things. And this is, in my opinion, probably the number one reason most Americans voted for Trump. Other than they thought he would beat up on Hillary, which everybody wanted to see. But because he's a businessman, because he's a negotiator, because he wrote the book called The Art of the Deal, and because he was tough, most Americans, I believe, were tired of very little growth, government growth and spending, high unemployment, high taxes, and low interest. They were tired of that. So they hired a businessman to go in there and turn it around. And by golly, he did. Now let's talk about some of the things that he has accomplished. Number one, there have been trillions of dollars, American dollars, repatriated back to the United States. And you say, well, how did Trump do that? Well, very easy. When he passed the tax code, which went into effect, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But part of it was these American companies moved their headquarters overseas and or were stockpiling cash overseas. As an example, for every phone that Apple sells in the United States, they have to pay X amount of income tax. And I don't know what the number is, let's say 30%. If they sell it overseas in a country, pick a country, if their headquarters is like in Luxembourg, then the taxes that they pay in the EU is a lot less, like 10%. So what Apple and a lot of other companies did is all of the money that they made overseas, they kept overseas. That way they could spend it overseas and not have to pay an additional 20% on that money in this country. So there is trillions of dollars sitting in banks overseas that are not coming into this country. Trump gave them a one-time opportunity to bring that money back, no taxes, and they did. And what's been the outcome of that? Well, wages have gone up, bonuses, hundreds of companies announced bonuses immediately. Apple is going to take that money and they're looking to build another campus, as is Google, to the tune of billions of dollars. They're going to hire thousands of people simply because they were allowed to bring that money back into the United States tax-free one time. Great accomplishment on Trump's part. For the first time in our history, there are more jobs available right now in the United States than we have people to fill them. Our unemployment rate officially is 3.5%. That 3.5% includes even people that stopped looking and came back into the workforce. People do not want to be underemployed. As an example, there might be 10 jobs for McDonald's, but one of the 3.5% is an electrical engineer. The point is, if you take all of the jobs in this country that are available right now, and then you take all of the people that in this country that are unemployed, 3.5%, there are more jobs than there are people to fill them. That's the first time that has happened in this country, and the reason that is happening is because we have a booming economy. A booming economy. Last year, the largest tax break was passed. It went into effect this year, and last year the GDP was the first quarter he came into office. The GDP went from 1 point something to 3.1%. This year, when the tax effect went into effect, it's 4% GDP growth. The largest tax break in American history went into effect the first of this year, and it has caused our economy to boom. The economy is going crazy, and that is solely because of Trump and his tax break, and the added incentive of the repatriation of all those trillions of dollars overseas coming back into this country. The American workers' wages are going up for the first time in 20 years. And when I say going up, I don't mean adjusted for inflation or they're going up because the inflation rate is going up. I mean actual wages are going up. Why are they going up? Because of what just happened, what I was just talking about. If you have too few people chasing too many jobs, then the people where you work don't want you to go make more money somewhere else, so they'll pay you more money to stay and do your job. Because if you leave, who are they going to get to fill it? And if they do get somebody to come in and fill it, they're going to have to pay them more, so they will stay. It's a beautiful cycle way that happens. They lower the taxes, so the businesses spend more money. They spend more money, they make more money, they make more money. Now we have more people buying because more people have money. And when that happens, they have to expand. When they expand, they hire more people. When a lot of companies expand, they've got more jobs than there are people. So now if you don't have enough people, you got to pay more money to get some people to come. So wages go up. When wages go up, and right now they're worried about inflation going up, and that's a normal thing that's going to happen because the company wants to raise their prices because they're growing too fast. They don't have enough people to fill the jobs, so they got to raise prices to keep the demand down a little bit. This is all normal. This is basic economics, but it's a beautiful thing when you can see it work. You know, after having it pounded into your head by the liberals and the left lying about in school, trying to teach about Reaganomics and what a crock that was, and it was an accident that it worked, and then you get to see it all over again, and it works beautifully. And that's one of the reasons I do these programs, because I don't want my kids or their kids to be lied to by the left wing in schools. I'm going to put down honestly what has happened and how you get to be a robust economy and a booming economy, and you can do it quickly if you do the right things at the right time. We talked about the GDP going from 3% last year to 4% within 6 months, and there are every indication it'll go higher than 4% by the end of the year. We talked about the 270% surcharge our dairy industry has been charged tax by Canada. and all Trump wants to do is a 25% tax on just their steel coming into this country. Now, the steel and aluminum going to and from Japan looks like this. Japan sells 100 cars in this country to us selling one car in Japan. And why is that? Because Japan puts an unbelievably high tariff on American cars going into that country. The cars that we do manage to get over there are so outrageously expensive because of the tariffs, they never sell any of them, and Trump is trying to work that out. And by doing the steel and the aluminum, that will raise the price of their cars here and hopefully tear them down, or at least motivate Japan to lower the tariff on American cars. Germany. When we sell an American car in Germany, they put over a 25% tax on our cars going into that country. For German cars coming into this country, we only have 2% tax. You think that's a little unfair? You think they might sell more cars in this country than we sell over there? Well, if they're 25% higher, of course we do. Again, by using the hammer of the steel and aluminum that they are using in these automobiles, bringing them over here, if Germany does not acquiesce and lower the tax on our automobiles going over there, we will get the money back through tariffs on the aluminum and steel that they bring into this country. The stock market stays strong. They have gained over 7,000 points since Trump has become president. And I want you to think about this. Every 1,000 points equals $1 trillion in new money. That means $7 trillion in new wealth has been created in a year and a half since Trump has become president. That is unheard of. Even when Reagan was president, the stock market went up crazy, but it only went up, if I recall, around 3,000 points, and it hovered there. Ours under Trump has gone up 7,000 points, and it's hovering, almost double. So the stock market, and by all accounts, the experts that I have read and read, it is not overvalued. There's not a bubble. In the late 80s, there was a tech bubble, and then the one that sent it down in the 90s was, the 90s was the housing bubble. There doesn't appear to be a bubble. The stocks are not overvalued with $7 additional trillion. That's incredible. And the last one I want to talk about is the unemployment rate in the country. I said it was 3.5. It's 3.8%, and they consider that to be full employment. And to tell you what a huge thing that is, I remember when I was in school, and there was a rule of thumb, and the rule of thumb was to be considered full employment and a booming economy, you had 6% unemployment and 6% inflation. If you had those numbers, you were doing a great job on the economy, and it was considered full employment. We are at 3.8% unemployment, and our inflation is less than 2%. Wow. All of the things we've talked about has been the accomplishment of Donald Trump and his administration from January 1 of this year until today. Now, I'm going to save this information and incorporate it into the end of the year program. If he keeps going at the rate he's going, we will have I'll have to do a 10-part series. Now, I want to do just some current events real quick because this has gone quite long, I think. But in this week, it was the 74th anniversary of D-Day, which is awesome. There was a 63-year-old lady who was granted amnesty by Donald Trump. She was a black lady who was convicted on marijuana charges, and it was a nonviolent crime, but she had gotten basically a life sentence. And Donald Trump said that was highly unfair and gave her amnesty. She's out of jail, and good. I think that was a good call. Good call. As we said earlier, Donald Trump went to the G7 meeting this week in Canada. EU and Asia all ganged up on the U.S. because of the tariffs. I would expect no less. You know, if you take candy away from a baby, they're going to cry and whine and fuss, but they'll eventually get over it and we'll move on and we'll be friends again. But you can't take something away from somebody that they've had for 30 years and expect them not to whine and cry and fuss. So they whine, cry, and fuss. They're going to whine, cry, and fuss as they write us a check. And that's the way it should be. Well, that was the current events. I wanted to we did not get to do a program last week, but I did have some current events that I wanted to cover just so we can mention them and have them on the record. We talked about Trump going to the G7 meeting. That was last week, and he asked for Russia to join, and all the members were upset with him. We covered that. Then he left that a day early and went to meet with his historic summit in Singapore with Kim Jong-un. They got a pledge to denuclearize North Korea. Declared in advance he will leave one day early, and that was a good thing because that means that they had this agreement worked out before he got there. The United States is 10 times better off now than before he went to Singapore, no matter what the press tells you, and the press can't stand it. The Inspector General's report was due out last week. It came out this week. It was very soft. All it did is basically wag its finger at the Democrats and Comey, and everybody was building that up. And I said all along that it'll amount to nothing because you're basically asking the swamp to judge the swamp, and they will wag their finger, but there'll be nothing happen. Nobody will go to jail. They might even make a sacrificial lamb out of somebody small and insignificant, but the people that need to go to jail will never go to jail. So, well, that's the program, everyone. I just want to make an announcement before we close. As I said in the beginning, this program and all the programs we do are produced by the Prayer Box Ministry. You can go over there and check us out at prayerboxministry.org, or you can go to iTunes and look under podcast for Right Wing Reverend. And we're over there. We've been on there about 2 years. All of our programs are being streamed out of there. So go to iTunes podcast and look for Right Wing Reverend. Well, that's a program, everyone. You have a blessed week. I look forward to next week when we can sit down and talk about this week in politics.